welcome into our home again. We've now come to the end of Holy Week, but I've been looking back and thinking about what it was like for the disciples during that first Holy Week. It all began so well. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey with crowds hailing him as God's king. The disciples were excited. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and now the crowd was hailing him. They must have felt that Jesus was going to act. It was Passover, and at Passover time, Jerusalem was full of Jews from all over the country, from all over the world. What a wonderful opportunity to rally them against the Roman oppressors. But Jesus didn't do what they expected. Instead of trying to get people to follow him in fighting the Romans, all he seemed to do was antagonize the priest at the temple. Over the days, tension mounted. The conflicts became sharper. But it was still a shock when the quiet of the Garden of Gethsemane was shattered by the tramp of soldiers who came to seize Jesus. And what did Jesus do? Nothing. He just let them take him away. The disciples were bewildered and afraid, so they fled and hid. Then, before they had time to gather their thoughts, the next morning he was being led up the road to Golgotha, carrying a crossbeam. By the end of that day, he was lying dead in a cold stone tomb. Who would have expected this on the day he rode in triumph into Jerusalem? The disciples were in shock. They were plunged into grief and despair. The day after the crucifixion was Sabbath, and so they stayed indoors, mourning the death of their friend and master. I imagine them crying and sobbing, inconsolable at their unexpected loss. They must have also felt so confused, so let down. All their hopes had been dashed. They had followed Jesus, expecting God to do great things through him, and now he was dead. It was all over. Then someone said, "What if they come for us now?" And they felt afraid and locked the doors. But the next morning, some of the women went to the tomb. When they got there, the stone was rolled away. They crept forward and peeped in. The grave clothes were lying there on the slab, but Jesus' body had gone. Then suddenly angels appeared and told them that Jesus was alive. They couldn't take it in. They'd seen him die. How could he be alive? As they went away from the tomb, Jesus himself met them. As he spoke to them, it began to sink in. He really was alive. Suddenly they felt such joy, and they rushed back to tell the other disciples. But the disciples just couldn't accept it. They thought, these silly, hysterical women are imagining things. They just can't accept that he's really gone. But despite that, Peter and John ran to the tomb, just in case. After all, Jesus had said that he would rise again. But when they got there, they found the grave clothes, but no angels, no Jesus. Later that day, 2 of the disciples decided they'd had enough. They were going home. So Cleopas and another disciple set off for Emmaus. As they walked along, they talked about the one thing which filled their minds, Jesus and his death. At some point, a man began walking alongside them. They didn't notice where he came from. He was just there. He began asking them about what they were saying, and you can hear the disillusionment in their voice. Jesus was a prophet, and we had hoped that he was going to redeem Israel. The man then began to explain the scriptures to them. Suddenly, passages they knew so well took on new meaning as he explained that Messiah had to die and then be raised to life. They were so deep in conversation that they reached Emmaus before they realized it. They didn't want to let him go, so they invited him to stay. As they sat down to eat, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and they recognized that it was Jesus. He was alive. Then he vanished. The 2 disciples were so excited. They had seen Jesus living, talking with them. They couldn't keep this news to themselves, so they went all the way back to Jerusalem. When they got there, they found the other disciples all talking excitedly. Jesus is alive! He has appeared to Peter. Can you imagine them all talking at once in their joy and amazement? Then Jesus himself appeared in the room. Even though they'd been talking about him being alive, they felt a bit afraid. Was it really him? Jesus asked them for something to eat. As they watched him, they realized that it was really Jesus, that he was alive again. And he began to explain to them from the scriptures why he had to die and rise again. Over the following days and weeks, Jesus repeatedly appeared to his disciples, helping them to be sure that he was really alive. Their confusion and uncertainty turned to joy and certainty. They began to tell others that Jesus had died, but had risen again. And so, 2,000 years later, in a country far from Palestine, we can declare with certainty, Alleluia, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.